Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to MALN Opinion Plus, a weekly series airing every Friday. This is a space for our opinions where we talk about current events and questions the Latino community is curious about. Today we are joined by Beth Chandler of YW Boston. Beth joined YW in November of 2012 and was appointed president and CEO in the summer of 2018. With over 20 years of experience working in corporate and nonprofit sectors, Beth has worked to support initiatives that focus on issues like affordable housing, community development, and urban public education. Welcome to our show this week, Beth.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. So to start off, would you like to take a moment and tell our audience a bit about YW Boston and the work you do in our communities?
Sure. So YW Boston, we are the oldest YWCA in the country. We have been around for over 156 years, and our work focuses on helping organizations create more inclusive environments so that women, people of color, and especially women of color can thrive at all levels.
And how did you come to join YW Boston? And what would you say about their work is really important to you?
So I joined YW Boston because I had spent many years before that working for other nonprofits that do wonderful work, but got me thinking about why they exist. And for all of them, part of the reason they exist is because of systemic issues within our country. And so I was drawn to YW Boston because I wanted to really try to eradicate the systemic racism that exists so that those organizations don't have to. So that's what drew me to the organization. And I'm really proud of the work that we do. We really, work with organizations cross-sector, meeting people where they are and helping them to understand the system of oppression that exists out in the world, as well as within their institutions, and how to recognize that, how to put policies and practices in place so that they can change some individual behavior as well as organizational behavior. And, when I talk about individual behavior, it's not because I am saying that people are doing these things intentionally. We all have different biases, regardless of how we may identify. And so it's important to recognize what those are and put things in place that may mitigate those biases, because sometimes they get in the way of people being able to be successful.
So what does that look like the services you guys offer to help mitigate these things?
Yeah, so we provide workshops, leadership programs, as well as some deeper work. And, part of the work is helping people just to understand what is the system in place when you're thinking of oppression? How does that play out for different groups, and thinking about it in a variety of ways. And so some of it is, how we may interact with people. Some of it might be related to policies and practices. Some of it might be our ideology that we have. And so helping people to identify that and then to think about, how might that be playing out for me individually? And I'll give a perfect example. So I have a bias towards athletes. I was a college athlete myself. And so I know when I see that in a resume that somebody was a college athlete, I often put them in the, we want to interview pile. And that doesn't mean that because they were an athlete, they're going to be better than somebody that wasn't. It's just a bias that I have. And so I don't look at activities that people did in college to influence my decision on whether or not they're capable of doing the job. So it's, a way that I can try to mitigate my bias towards athletes so that I'm not disadvantaging, those that are not. So that's an example of a way that, through our work, I've identified a bias I have. And so we work with people to help them identify things that they may be doing even unintentionally, having organizations look at some of their practices to see if they're leading to unintentional outcomes and help them think about ways to change that.
I can totally see how important it can be to make yourself acquainted with those biases that you have. So how has COVID-19 impacted the work that YW Boston does? And how has the organization had to change to fit into this new world we're kind of living in?
Yes. So prior to COVID, we delivered all of our trainings in person. And once COVID hit, we had to deliver everything remotely. And so it required us to put all of our content online, to add different activities, because some of the activities that worked well in person would not work well online. It forced us to become much more nimble and knowledgeable about different technologies. And so all of that was to the benefit of the organization, but it certainly happened a lot quicker than we would have anticipated. It also helped us really think about, what are issues that organizations should be mindful of when it comes to being an inclusive environment when working remotely. And how do you really think about employees who may be impacted because of family obligations, particularly, women who have children, and I know men do as well, but often it's those who identify as women that are taking the burden of childcare responsibilities. And so what do organizations need to be thinking about so that they don't inadvertently exclude people who are dealing with other family responsibilities, particularly when they are, in the beginning part of COVID when no one could go out, right? And so you may have roommate issues for why you don't want to be on camera or can't be on camera. You may worry about your kids, or there may be other adults in the house. And so part of our work was thinking about how do we help organizations be more aware of those issues so that they can put things in place that didn't penalize people inadvertently. And so thinking about also, how do you have inclusive meetings when you are meeting remotely? What are, what are practices that you can do to make sure that people are really feeling included? Because it's just a different way to connect with folks when you're doing it via camera versus all in the same room.
That must have been so interesting to work on while everyone at YW Boston was also doing the same thing,
Yes.
starting to do working from home and all that stuff. So it seems to me that diversity, equity, and inclusion are kind of core facets of the work that YW Boston does. What would you say these terms mean to you personally, and why do you believe they're so important today?
So, how we define and how I define diversity, equity, inclusion. So, diversity is really just counting the numbers and thinking about the different identities that people have and being able to check off people because of those identities. Inclusion is ensuring that people's voices are really heard regardless of how they identify, and particularly if somebody identifies from a marginalized communities, are their voices being heard in organizations? Are they really allowed to provide input? Do they have power and influence, whether they're in the room or not? That's the inclusion piece. And then equity, I think of equity as what are the mechanisms that you're putting in place to get from diversity to inclusion? So what are the practices? What are the policies? What is your culture that is helping you ensure that everybody within your organization can feel included? And why it matters is because I feel everybody benefits. And so when we talk about, diversity, equity, inclusion, it's about creating a work environment where everyone feels that they can excel, where they feel valued, because we know that when employees feel valued, when employees feel that they belong, when employees feel that their voices are heard, that leads to them being more productive. And so why wouldn't an organization want that for all of their employees as opposed to, certain groups of people? And so for us, it's really about how is everybody allowed to thrive within the organization that they work?
And how many organizations would you say you work with a year on diversity, equity, inclusion?
With probably a couple of hundred in a variety of ways. So again, we do workshops, and we are very clear that workshops don't get to change, but it's often helpful for organizations that are beginning this work to have shared language and frameworks. And so that's really what our workshops are for. Our deeper work is our Inclusion Boston work, where we're working with people for 10 hours, having conversations around race and ethnicity. What does that mean to them? What does it mean to different groups of people? And then helping them use the data within the organization to understand where there may be disconnects, and then supporting them for a year in putting together and implementing an action plan to address issues that have arisen. And then we do leadership programs as well. And so, all of those together really help organizations move forward. And in some cases, we work with some organizations doing all three of those things. And in some cases, we may do a workshop with one organization and Inclusion Boston with another, or Lead Boston with another. And so, but collectively, it's several hundred organizations that we work with.
And so how would a company or an organization reach out and start making that change with you guys, trying to set something up?
Yeah, so organizations can reach out to Shira Bornstein, who is on our staff and does a lot of our business development work. And Shira would have a conversation to just understand, where is the organization today? Where do they want to be? What do they feel is getting in the way? And then explore if the services we offer are a good fit to help them on this journey. Because that's really our goal, is to help people and support organizations on this journey, because we do believe it's a never-ending journey. But ultimately, we want to help build your capacity internally to do this work so that you don't need us to continue.
So I just kind of wanted to switch topics a little bit as we're nearing the end of our interview. And I thought it'd be really important to touch on this. And I think it's clear that trans, non-binary, and queer people are just heavily at risk of discrimination and violence throughout much of their lives. How do these people fit into your organization's mission and goals?
Sure. So again, we're about creating an inclusive environment for all employees. And so, we think, it's important that everybody feel, and particularly folks in the trans community, but every community where people are marginalized, that they feel a part of their organizations and that they're allowed to thrive. And so people who are, part of the LGBTQ community are certainly part of everyone that we're talking about in doing this work. And though our work focuses on race and gender, we do talk about other identities as well that people have that may be marginalized in organizations.
Okay, and is there any way that YW Boston kind of has tried to specifically tailor services to helping these types of individuals, since their needs may be different than others?
For helping trans individuals? I don't know if we have focused particularly on trans, but again, I think the way that we approach our work is looking at obstacles for any marginalized group. And so working with organizations to look at who is not excelling in your organization compared to other groups, and then helping them to identify what might be strategies to address challenges that group may face. So if we're working with an organization that has identified the trans community within their organization is not having the same opportunities, then we will support them in developing some strategies to think about what are ways to mitigate what's getting in the way for folks who may be trans.
Thank you for that answer. So lastly, just what are some different ways people can get involved or just support YW Boston in their work?
Yeah, so we have blogs on our website that have tips for helping people think about how to be more inclusive, both as an individual and as an employee. And so I encourage people to go on our website and look at our blogs to see what tips they may learn. I also encourage people. We have events several times a year, and one of the goals for every event of ours is that people walk away with information that they can use back in their organization. So we really want to give people things that are actionable. So, going on our website and seeing when events are coming up, signing up for our newsletter. And then certainly if people are in a position to contribute financially, we would love that as well. And then we have an advocacy committee. So if people want to get involved, particularly looking at local and state regulations and laws and wanting to advocate for changes, we are, again, we have an advocacy committee that people can get involved in. And one of the things we supported several years ago was the trans bill and making sure that got passed. So, that is certainly a part of our advocacy work.
Great. And is there any other information, news, or resources you would like to share with our audience?
No, again, I just encourage people to go on our website, www.ywboston.org. There are lots of resources. We also have reading lists that have been curated from staff and board members and others over the past couple of years. And now that we're into summer and people might be taking vacations and looking for good reads, you can find many on those lists as well. We also will be coming out soon with a map of 10 businesses that are either women and or people of color owned. And so we encourage people to look at the map and go to some places that you might not have gone to before. And Lord knows that, entrepreneurs, and particularly entrepreneurs of color and women, need, as all of our support, given what's happened with COVID-19 and how they've been impacted.
Thank you so much for talking with us today, Beth, and for being our guest on the MALN Opinion Plus.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Diego.
And join us for another episode in 2 weeks. For more information about our discussion today, check out our web story on malatinonews.com. You can follow us on Twitter at MALatinoNews and Instagram at MA_Latino News. I'm Diego Viruel with MALN Opinion Plus. See you next time.